Good morning. There we go. Good morning. My name is Alex Serrano. I'm the director of the USDA Risk Management Agency Regional Office in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our office serves the 14 states from North Carolina to Maine. Last year, after uh, the tropical storm, or I guess it was Hurricane Idalia, came through Georgia and became Tropical Storm Idalia, impacted southeastern North Carolina, and then Tropical Storm Ophelia impacted eastern North Carolina. Our office had a lot of questions about how the tropical storm option worked. And so we'll thank Farm Credit folks for inviting us to do a little webinar and provide some information on how that tropical storm option works, sort of a little background, a little refresher on how the policy works if you weren't, if you had any questions, and then also just a little bit of discussion about the future of the policy and where we see it going. And so with that, I'm going to share a PowerPoint, and let's see when that comes up. All right. And Janet, is this showing well? If it is, give me a thumbs up. All right. I see a thumbs up. So we're going to give a quick overview of the tropical storm option. The background, we had in 2018 in particular, but I think for several years, we had Hurricane Matthew in 2016. We had the big tropical storm in 2015 that impacted South Carolina the worst, but also really impacted our cotton crop. And then 2018, we had Hurricane Florence in North Carolina, Hurricane Michael in Georgia. And these were absolutely devastating hurricanes to agriculture across the entire Southeast. And so, almost right after that, in the 2018 Farm Bill, we were required by Congress to research and develop a hurricane project or product, excuse me. What we came up with in 2020 was the HIP-WE program. This is Hurricane Insurance Protection Wind Index. And the intent of this program was to be a simple program that gave a rapid payment to producers who have experienced a hurricane, and with HIP-WE, it was with the hurricane. So we wanted to base the policy on the policy or base the endorsement on the policy deductible. So if you had a corn policy at a 75% coverage, you had a 25% deductible. So we wanted to make your deductible eligible for coverage because we knew you had just experienced a terrible disaster, and we wanted it to pay you really quickly. So the way it worked is if a named storm with hurricane or hurricane force winds, which will be 74 miles an hour as defined by NOAA National Hurricane Center, impacted your county or an adjacent county, you would get a payment basically within 30 days of that determination. And we made it available in the first year. It's available for over 70 crops. These are the areas where the policy is available. You have this is a 2023 map. And so we had, originally mostly in the eastern and coastal parts of the South and some into the Northeast. And then once we had the tropical storm option added, tropical storms can go further inland and impact further inland than hurricane force winds. And so we expanded it to cover, into the mountains of North Carolina and into much of the mountains of Virginia, and then on up into the up through the Appalachians. So after the hurricane policy has been popular. It's sold really, really well. We've had a lot of people buy this. We've gotten a lot of feedback. I think in 2020, there was some initial confusion about how the policy worked. But after that was sorted out, this has been a really popular program. When we go out and talk to people, a lot of people buy it. The agents are excited to sell it. It's something that people see as a really good fit, really good risk management tool for Eastern North Carolina in particular. But one of the feedbacks that we got was sometimes the worst thing that can happen to us isn't the hurricane. It's if a tropical storm comes and sits on top of us and dumps rain for, a great quantity of rain. And so what we came up with was for 2023 was the first year an option that if you buy HIP-WE endorsement, so you buy the hurricane protection, you can get a special option to get tropical storm coverage. So this is the tropical storm option is what we call it. So for the tropical storm option to trigger, you have to have a named tropical storm, And then with hurricane, there was only one county trigger. You had to have hurricane force winds. With tropical storm, you have to have two county triggers. You have to have a 34 knot, which is a 39-mile-an-hour wind. You have to have a final rainfall amount of at least 6 inches. And later in the slide, we'll explain how our policy defines a final rainfall amount. But I think that's one of the areas where we saw a lot of confusion and got a lot of questions last year. But again, as soon as these triggers are met, there's a rapid payment. And the way that we established this is that a tropical storm was worth about half of a hurricane payment. So if you have two tropical storms, you would get the equivalent of one hurricane payment. You could have a tropical storm and a hurricane. You still wouldn't get more than one hurricane payment, but you get half a payment for a tropical storm. 50% of your total HIP-WE coverage is paid per storm. So then the question is, well, how are the trigger counties determined? And we have two types of trigger counties. You have direct trigger, which is wind and rain requirements are both met in your county. And we have indirect triggers, which means you're adjacent to a direct trigger county. So either you have both wind and rain impact your county, or you're next to a county where that happens. Those are the two ways that our tropical storm option will trigger a payment. So how's the rain trigger determined? This is where we got a lot of questions last year. And we actually, we're going to send or include with this, RMA put a YouTube video together this winter that really gets into the math behind this final rainfall amount. And you know, would give you an example of a county with everything broken down. I get uncomfortable talking about math on a webinar because I'm afraid I'm going to make you guys bored. So I wanted to go through this quickly. But you first have to meet the final rainfall amount of at least 6 inches. And the final rainfall amount is defined as your county grid weighted average rainfall across the county based on NOAA's CPC Unified Gauge data set. So NOAA's data set is a daily precipitation data set that is gathered every day, and it breaks the country out into grids. They're about 17-mile by 17-mile square grids. They're based on longitude and latitude. So as you get further from the equator, the grids get a little bit longer. But and I have a slide, next slide is showing you what the grids look like. But the rain must meet or exceed at 6 inches during a 4-day period. Day one is the day before the 34-knot wind arrives, and then the day the 34-knot wind arrives, and then the next 2 days. And we'll look at a cumulative rain total across the county based on that county grid weighted average. So to give you an example of how the grid looks, I went, and RMA has a tool for the pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance product on our public website, and I can actually have this also included in this, that lets you look at, so PRF is a popular livestock insurance product that uses these same grids. And so here I've got Duplin County screenshotted for you, and you can see that there are 9 different grids that make up Duplin County. And if you look in, you sort of squint, that there's numbers to the grids: 18208, 18209, 18210. 18210 is the one that's in the top right quadrant of this picture, and you can see, or maybe you can't see, very little of Duplin County is included in this grid. It's majority in Lenoir County, but it's got very little in Duplin. Meanwhile, if you look in the square dead middle of the map, there's a grid 17909 that's entirely contained in Duplin County. And so we do a weighted average. So we look at the rainfall in each of these grids. We look at how much of the county is made up by each of these grids, and then we weight the amount of rainfall over this 4-day period. And that is how this is determined. That's how we determine if the rainfall trigger is met. Then we have the wind trigger. So the wind trigger is determined based on the sustained surface wind that's experienced from the tropical storm event. We use NOAA's IBTRAX wind corridor. The IBTRAX stands for International Best Track for Climate Science. So every hurricane season, tropical storm season, NOAA tracks each storm, and they plot the points of the storm as it travels through the ocean. And unfortunately, when it does impact the United States or the Caribbean, or Mexico, we track it through. NOAA tracks it, by point. And this NOAA IBTRAX data is really designed more than anything to save lives. They're trying to get the best possible information about where the storm is in the moment and where it's going, so that they can, provide timely information to disaster management people, because these storms kill people. So this is what this NOAA IBTRAX data is designed to do. Well, after it's done and published, we use it to determine, well, where did the storm go and what were the extents of the wind. And so we look for the tropical storm trigger. How far from the center of the storm did 39-mile-an-hour wind reach when it's measured by an average over a 2-minute period? And so we sort of measure it. We'll make a corridor. And we'll say from the center of the storm, this far, based on this NOAA data, tropical storm winds were in force. And so if there's tropical storm wind and there's 6 inches of rain over that 4 days, the tropical storm option will trigger a payment. And so that is how the program works now. So then the question is, well, what happens after the storm? Real-time data is released by NOAA. The CPC data is released pretty much daily. They'll get the rainfall totals from their gauges. They'll calculate their grid values, and they release that immediately. And then as soon as that IBTRAX data is released, RMA will look and analyze the data, and we'll say, okay, how much rain was there in these counties, and were they impacted by wind? If a county triggers, RMA will publish a bulletin to our insurance partners that authorizes payments. The payments are supposed to come within 30 days of the county trigger being published. If the county does not trigger, last year in the first year, we did not issue any information. We just sort of informally reached out through our insurance partners and the people that called and said, oh yeah, storm came through. Ophelia was a good example of this. People said, well, is Ophelia going to pay me in Martin County? Well, no, we've done the review, but we didn't publish a bulletin or a memo. That is one of the lessons learned. We have a slide about that later. So going forward, RMA will release information that reviews have been completed, so there's not uncertainty in the countryside. So how will we know if county triggered? Well, first, RMA is going to have I'll start with our actuarial documents. RMA is going to publish in our actuarial information that we share with our insurance companies in our HIPWE rates and payments tab, whether or not a tropical storm triggered. And so, for example, here, the county we picked here, Idalia did trigger a payment. It puts Idalia, it puts whether it was a hurricane or a tropical storm, and it puts the date of the triggering event. And so that will be one way so you can check your county. If you want to go to last year and see, did my county pay? That's one way you can check. Another way you can check is we're going to issue a bulletin. So it's called a product management bulletin. It's available on our RMA website. It will be a notice that trigger counties are available, and it will also provide a map and a table. And so I'm going to go quick to the map. This was the initial information I don't think this was initial. This was the updated information for Hurricane Idalia. And you can see down in Florida and Georgia, you have the dark green and the brown. Those are the hurricane counties that were impacted by Hurricane Idalia. And you see the contiguous, the primary triggers are in sort of a teal or dark green, and then the secondary triggers are in a brown. And then you can see as Idalia lost some of its hurricane strength, but continued to be a damaging tropical storm, you can see the counties that triggered that met the rainfall amount. And then you can see those are sort of in a light blue or teal, light teal. And then you have sort of a yellow, brown, tan color are your contiguous counties. And so these are the counties that triggered because of Idalia. And then all along, we have a little dot that shows where the center point of the storm was. So you can follow the track of it and see where payments were triggered. So that's our I guess, sort of leads the question. So, we do our first review. We do everything in real time. Well, is there a second review? Does RMA do any quality control? And yes, there is a secondary review. So RMA does not review, we're not responsible for collecting the data. NOAA is. We use NOAA's data. NOAA are the climate experts. NOAA are the weather experts. We are not. We do not have our own RMA rain gauges. We use NOAA's data, but NOAA will do a quality control review of both of their data sets. So the rainfall, the CPC gauge data set, they do a quality control review that takes approximately 60 days. This number is not in statute or in law or anything. It's their standard. So it could be a little bit longer. It could be a little bit quicker, but 60 days is sort of the typical standard for NOAA's quality control review. So 60 days after the storm, we will look again, or around 60 days, and say, okay, did NOAA get the rainfall amounts right? And if NOAA initially overestimated the rainfall, we won't take a payment back. Once a county triggers, it triggers for good. If NOAA undercounted the rainfall in the real-time data set and there's additional rainfall, then we will issue additional payments. And so I think on this slide, it might be hard to see, but you can see on Columbus County, North Carolina, there's a little hash mark. And so initially, Columbus County was determined to have just under 6 inches of rainfall. After NOAA did their quality control, Columbus County had more than 6 inches of rainfall. Because of the contiguous county mechanics, the farmers of Columbus County weren't really impacted by this change. They are already contiguous to Horry County in South Carolina. They had already received a payment. But because Columbus was declared a primary county, Bladen and Pender, which are adjacent to Columbus, became eligible for payments. So there's that there's a lot that can happen. You have the first storm, and what's the impact? You see the data review there. Additional counties can trigger, whether they trigger contiguously or as primary counties. So the rainfall data is reviewed again after 60 days. The wind data, the NOAA IBTRAX data, is going to be reviewed typically the following calendar year. Again, the goal of the people working at NOAA on the IBTRAX is really not to be overwrought, but they're concerned with saving lives and giving people in emergency management positions the best possible information. So as soon as Hurricane Florence is done, there's a hurricane that starts with G, and they need to be tracking that, and they need to be providing information to people all over the world about what that hurricane is doing. So they don't do a lot of quality control immediately after on the wind speed, but they are scientists and they are, competent, capable professionals. So they're going to look back after the storm is over the following year after the season and do a quality control review as well. And so if they determine that the wind extents were different after quality control, we will look and review that data. And after that review, if additional counties meet either the wind trigger for a tropical storm and have already met the rain trigger, or they meet the wind trigger for a hurricane, maybe you got a tropical storm payment, but it turns out, well, actually, you should have got a hurricane payment. The wind was higher than initially estimated. The payment will be updated. And we're never going to take a payment we made back. This is very producer friendly. This will be an additional payment for the producer. And the updates will come through the same methods that we shared with you earlier in the slides. So with anything with insurance, especially something that's so new, this was sort of conceived of in 2018 and first implemented in 2020. Crop insurance program goes back to the Dust Bowl. We've been working with farmers and farm groups for a long time to refine things, and we're really interested in getting it right. So we've been reaching out to farm groups across not just the state, but the entire Southeast. And, what are your experiences? What are things we should be thinking about? What should we be looking at? And so in the immediate term, one of the biggest feedbacks we got last year, or biggest points of feedback, was consistent communication. When the storm triggers, they thought we did a pretty good job of communication, but when the storm does not trigger, they thought we didn't do a very good job of communication. And so we're going to try, and as soon as our review is done, whether it triggers or not, we're going to have publicly available information showing that we've done a review and showing the outcome of our review. Now, the second point is transparency. Sort of goes to consistent communication, but we want to be publishing the rainfall amounts in each county so growers can say, okay, how close was I? It gets people out of word of mouth, gets people out of, uncertainty. This is an insurance program people are counting on. We want to be as transparent as possible. So we're going to try and give the best information we can in a usable form. One of the challenges with our NOAA CPC data set is that it is not accessible to the layperson, and that would include me. So we have people in our agency that are really good with computers and that can take, data that's in a binary code and translate it into a spatial data set and then impose that spatial data set on a map. I cannot do that. Many of you probably cannot do that. So we want to take that work that we've been doing and share it publicly so you guys know what we've done and can ask questions. And we're real open to feedback about being as transparent as possible about how this policy works. The other feedback we've got is, is there room for some program design modifications? So one of the issues actually came out of South Carolina. There was a county down there that after the storm impacted, Idalia impacted them, their final rainfall amount was 5.98 or 5.99 inches of rain. They triggered, that county itself triggered for a payment. They were contiguous to a trigger county, but there was a county next to them that said, I got sort of a long county. I got absolutely blasted. This county should have triggered. This is really unfair. And so we've worked with them to kind of come up with a common sense approach For 2025, so not for this year, 2024, we didn't make any design modifications, but for 2025, so for next year, 5.9 inches of rain will round up to 6 inches. But we want to keep true to the original intent of the program. We want this to be a simple program. We want it to pay you quickly. We don't want an adjuster to have to go out after a hurricane and look at something. We want us to be able to look more broadly at data about what happened across the countryside and get money in your pockets really quickly. So that is the intent of the program. And we want it to be simple. So we're continuing to work with grower groups to see if there's ways we can enhance it to make sure that it's a workable, usable risk management tool. And so that is my overall presentation on tropical storm. I have one last slide I wanted to bring up. When I was asked to do this and was putting this together, it was in June, and there was drought was the issue in eastern North Carolina at that time. So, we talked about tropical storm. What do I do? How do I handle drought? So drought is covered under your basic crop insurance policy. It will not be covered under the hurricane endorsement. Obviously, it's those are conflicting things. But I just wanted to remind everybody, if you have drought, you're experiencing drought, hopefully you've already done this, report damage or loss to your agent as soon as you can. Make a notice of loss within 72 hours of initial discovery. And so that's just a quick drought reminder before we wrap this up. And then last slide here is the contact information. That's my direct phone number. That's my email address. If you have any questions, if there's anything from this presentation that left you curious or you wanted to know more or you wanted to give feedback, we're really excited to take that. And we're really interested to continue working with you guys to make sure that, the Southeast and North Carolina has the best possible risk management tools when you guys deal with tropical storms and hurricanes. And so that is what I've got.